My name is Henrietta. I'm 32 years old, and I built a specialty bakery chain from nothing into a $5.2 million empire over 8 years. But one Monday morning, I arrived at work to find the locks changed, and my sister Marlene sitting in my CEO office. The gut punch came when I saw my mother's signature on transfer documents she'd secretly prepared using an old power of attorney. Before I share how this betrayal unfolded, let me know where you're watching from today. If you've ever been blindsided by family, please subscribe to hear how I survived this. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I was always the one with big dreams, while my sister Marlene was our mother's golden child. She had straight A's and was on track for medical school, while I barely scraped through high school because I spent my nights reading business books and watching cooking shows. My entrepreneurial spirit made no sense to my mother Dorothy, who believed success only came through traditional education. At 24, fresh out of culinary school, I started with just a beat-up food truck I bought for $8,000 using every penny of my savings. I named it Sweet Henrietta's and began selling gourmet cupcakes at farmers markets around Chicago. Those early days were brutal. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning to bake, drive to markets by 6, sell until evening, then clean and prep until midnight. I literally slept in that truck between events, showering at the gym, living on leftover cupcakes and pure determination. My first real breakthrough came 6 months in when I met Marcus, who owned 3 independent coffee shops in the city. He tried my salted caramel bourbon cupcake at the Lincoln Park Farmers Market and immediately wanted to stock them in all his locations. That contract gave me enough steady income to move from the truck to my first small storefront, a 600 square foot space in Lincoln Park that had been empty for 2 years. The day I signed that lease, I hired my first 2 employees. Carlos was a 50-year-old master baker from Mexico who'd been laid off from a commercial bakery. He believed in my vision when nobody else did, working for minimum wage plus profit sharing that I promised would come someday. Jennifer was 28, a single mom who needed flexible hours and had incredible operations skills from her time managing a small restaurant. These 2 became more than employees. They became family, the kind that actually supported my dreams. Within 18 months, we were profitable enough to open a second location in Wicker Park. The neighborhood was gentrifying, rapidly perfect for our target market of young professionals who'd pay $6 for a cupcake made with Madagascar vanilla and organic eggs. Then came the 3rd location in Evanston, strategically placed near Northwestern University. Each expansion was calculated leveraging profits from existing stores rather than taking on debt. The real game changer was developing our signature mood boost product line. I spent months researching adaptogens, working with a nutritionist to incorporate ashwagandha, rhodiola, and other supplements into our comfort desserts without compromising taste. We marketed them as treats that could actually make you feel better, not just emotionally, but physically. The wellness angle attracted media attention, and suddenly the Chicago Tribune was calling us the future of functional desserts. That article caught the attention of Whole Foods buyers for the Midwest region. After 3 months of negotiations, tastings, and facility inspections, we secured a distribution deal that would put our products in 28 stores across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. The night I signed that contract, Carlos and Jennifer stayed late, and we drank champagne from coffee cups, crying and laughing because we'd actually made it. But success came at a personal cost I hadn't anticipated. I missed my college roommate's wedding because of a production crisis. I cancelled 5 vacations in 3 years. I went on exactly 2 dates in 4 years, both disasters, because I spent the whole time talking about quarterly projections. My entire life revolved around the business. Friends stopped inviting me places because they knew I'd say no. My apartment was basically just a place to shower and occasionally sleep. I told myself it would all be worth it once the business was fully established, that I'd have time for life later. While I was building my empire, my family dynamics grew increasingly toxic. My mother Dorothy never missed an opportunity to compare me unfavorably to Marlene, despite the obvious reversal in our fortunes. Even with my business thriving, she'd say things like, "At least Marlene tried to become a doctor," or "Marlene has more important things than money." The irony was painful considering Marlene had dropped out of medical school after 2 semesters, claiming the pressure was too much. By the time Marlene turned 35, she'd failed at 3 different careers. First, she tried to become a pharmaceutical sales rep, but got fired for consistently missing quotas. Then she decided she was meant to be a real estate agent, except she never passed the licensing exam after 4 attempts. Her last venture was a boutique clothing store that my mother funded with her entire retirement savings, $40,000 that disappeared when the store closed after 4 months. Throughout all these failures, I was the family ATM. Marlene would show up at my office, usually during our busiest hours, with some sob story about rent being due or her car breaking down. Over 5 years, I gave her more than $40,000 in loans that we both knew would never be repaid. Whenever I tried to say no, my mother would launch into guilt trips about how family helps family and remind me that I had more than enough to share. The situation reached absurd levels when I let Marlene live in my investment property, a 2-bedroom condo in Lakeview that I'd bought as a rental income source. She was supposed to pay $1,200 a month, significantly below market rate. In 2 years, she paid exactly 3 months of rent. When she finally moved out, the place was destroyed. There were wine stains on every carpet holes in the walls, and somehow she'd managed to break the granite countertop. The repair costs exceeded $20,000. Christmas of the previous year was when things really exploded. We were at my mother's house, and I'd brought expensive gifts for everyone, including a designer purse for Marlene that she'd been posting about wanting on Instagram. Instead of thanking me, she had a complete meltdown at dinner, screaming that I was showing off and trying to make her feel worthless. She actually threw the purse at me and stormed out. My mother spent the rest of the evening consoling her on the phone, while I cleaned up the dinner dishes alone. The wedding disaster happened 3 years ago, though it still comes up in every family argument. Marlene got engaged to Gregory, an investment banker she'd known for 6 months. She planned this elaborate 200-person wedding at the Drake Hotel, and when the bills started coming, guess who my mother called? I tried to set a budget of $10,000, which was already generous, but Marlene cried to our mother about how I was ruining her one chance at happiness. I ended up paying $30,000 for a wedding where the groom literally left her at the altar. He texted her from the airport saying he couldn't go through with it. My father would have never let things get this bad. He passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack 3 days after visiting my second store location. He was the only one who truly celebrated my success. He'd bring his golf buddies to the bakery, bragging about his daughter, the CEO. His last words to me were about how proud he was that I'd built something from nothing. After he died, my mother's favoritism toward Marlene became even more blatant, like she was overcorrecting for his support of me. The resentment from Marlene grew with every year of my success. She'd make passive-aggressive comments at family gatherings about how anyone could sell cupcakes or how I just got lucky with timing. She once told my aunt that the only reason Whole Foods worked with me was because they needed a female-owned business for their diversity quota. She'd post on social media about how real success isn't about money, but about helping people clearly aimed at me while she hadn't held a job in 2 years. My mother's financial entanglement with Marlene went beyond the failed boutique. She took out a home equity loan to pay for Marlene's Mercedes lease. When she couldn't afford it, she cashed out a life insurance policy to cover Marlene's credit card debt. Every financial mistake Marlene made, my mother cushioned while simultaneously telling me I should be grateful for my privileges, as if I hadn't worked 18-hour days to build everything I had. I tried desperately to maintain boundaries between family and business. I refused to hire Marlene despite constant pressure. I kept business discussions off limits at family gatherings. I even started lying about how well the company was doing, downplaying our success to avoid triggering more resentment. But my mother kept pushing, suggesting Marlene could do our social media or help with marketing areas where she had zero experience or skill. The setup for the betrayal began 3 months before it happened, though I was too trusting to see the warning signs. My mother suddenly developed an intense interest in understanding business structures and legal frameworks. She'd call me with questions about ownership percentages, how partnerships worked, and what happened to businesses when owners became incapacitated. She framed it as finally wanting to understand my success, and I was so desperate for her approval that I explained everything in detail. She insisted on meeting my corporate attorney, claiming she wanted to learn from the best to maybe help Marlene start something new. I actually thought this was progress, that maybe she was accepting that traditional paths weren't for everyone. I brought her to a meeting where my lawyer explained our corporate structure, even showing her the articles of incorporation and operating agreements. She took photos of documents saying she wanted to study them later. The power of attorney issue was my biggest mistake. Years ago, when I was 25 and my father had just died, my mother had me sign a bunch of documents she said were for medical emergencies and estate planning. One was a durable power of attorney that I'd completely forgotten about. It was broad, giving her authority to act on my behalf if I was incapacitated, but the definition of incapacitation was vague enough to be exploited. About 6 weeks before the betrayal, Marlene started hanging around the flagship store constantly. She'd arrive at opening, watching everything, taking pictures of our recipe books when she thought no one was looking. She shadowed Carlos during production, asked Jennifer detailed questions about our supplier contracts and payment systems. When employees asked me about it, I brushed it off as Marlene finally taking an interest in work, maybe preparing to ask for a job. My staff started expressing discomfort. Carlos pulled me aside, saying Marlene had offered him double his salary to leave and work for a new bakery she was planning. Jennifer caught her photographing our customer database and trying to access our online banking portal. The evening shift supervisor reported that Marlene had been asking about alarm codes and safe combinations, claiming I'd sent her to get cash for deposits. 2 weeks before the takeover, my mother claimed she was having heart problems. She needed help organizing her affairs, she said, in case something happened. I spent an entire Sunday at her house, signing what I thought were her documents, power of attorney forms for her bank accounts, medical directives. She kept putting papers in front of me while crying about mortality and how she needed to know everything was in order. I signed everything, wanting to comfort her, not reading carefully through my tears. The Friday before I lost everything was strange in retrospect. My mother insisted on a family dinner at an expensive restaurant downtown. She was unusually emotional, kept hugging me, telling me how proud she was of everything I'd accomplished. Marlene was oddly quiet, couldn't make eye contact, kept checking her phone. They insisted on paying, which should have been my biggest red flag. My mother had never picked up a check in her life. That weekend, I started getting concerning texts from my night manager. Someone had tried to access the safe after hours using an old code. The alarm company called about requests to change the primary contact number. Our bank notified us of attempts to add new authorized users to our accounts. I planned to deal with everything Monday morning, thinking we might have a security breach. Monday morning, I arrived at 6 a.m. as I had every day for 8 years. My key didn't work. The security guard, someone I'd never seen before, told me new ownership had taken over and I wasn't on the access list. I thought it was a joke until I saw the paperwork. He showed me ownership transfer documents with my signature, except I'd never signed them. Then I saw my mother's signature as the person executing the transfer under power of attorney. Walking into my own building as a visitor was surreal. The staff at the front counter looked confused and scared. Jennifer was already there, tears streaming down her face. She led me to what used to be my office, and there was Marlene sitting in my chair, my mother standing behind her, like some kind of puppet master. Neither of them could look me in the eye. The nameplate on the desk already said Marlene Davidson, CEO. The document spread across my former desk told the whole twisted story. The ownership transfer was dated 3 days prior, executed using the power of attorney I'd signed 7 years ago. My mother's lawyer had crafted a narrative that I was suffering from severe burnout and mental exhaustion, making me incapacitated within the broad definition of that old document. They'd even included a letter from a psychiatrist I'd never met, diagnosing me based on secondhand information about my work habits. The legal technicality was ingenious in its cruelty. Because the transfer happened between family members and used a valid power of attorney, it wasn't technically theft. The lawyer had exploited a loophole in Illinois law about family business transfers and mental health determinations. My own signature on that old document made me complicit in my own destruction. The business I'd built with my blood and sweat had been legally stolen while I slept in my bed. The staff reactions broke my heart more than losing the business. Jennifer stood up to Marlene, immediately demanding to know how they could do this to me. Marlene's response was to threaten her with termination for insubordination. Carlos walked over to me, this proud man with tears in his eyes, and said in Spanish that he wouldn't work for thieves. Half the morning shift was crying, the other half in shocked silence, everyone looking to me for answers I didn't have. The humiliation of being escorted out by security Marlene had already hired was unbearable. These were 2 large men who grabbed my arms when I tried to go to my office to get personal items. They marched me through the kitchen I'd designed, past the ovens I'd purchased one at a time as we could afford them, through the dining room where I'd served coffee to our first customers. My employees watched in horror as I was literally thrown out of the building I'd signed the lease on 8 years ago. The emergency meeting with my lawyer that afternoon was devastating. He explained that fighting the transfer would be expensive and complicated. Because it was a family matter using a legitimate power of attorney, the courts would be reluctant to intervene. The mental health angle was particularly damaging. Fighting it would require proving my mental fitness, which could take months and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Meanwhile, Marlene had full control of the business and all its assets. The financial freeze was immediate and comprehensive. Every business account had been changed over the weekend. My corporate credit cards were cancelled. The salary I'd been paying myself a modest $70,000 a year because I reinvested, everything else was stopped. I had about $8,000 in personal savings, which would barely cover a legal retainer. The retirement account I'd built was tied to the business, now inaccessible. 8 years of financial security evaporated in 72 hours. My customer relationships, carefully cultivated over years, were being systematically destroyed. I called my contact at Whole Foods from my car, sobbing as I explained the situation. She was sympathetic, but said Marlene had already introduced herself as the new CEO and promised improvements to our product line. The coffee shop owner who gave me my first break was confused, saying Marlene told him I'd had a nervous breakdown and was getting treatment. Every client had been fed a different lie about my absence. The social media takeover was particularly cruel. 10 years of content I'd created, thousands of posts showcasing our journey, customer testimonials, behind-the-scenes videos of our process, all now controlled by Marlene. She'd already posted an announcement about taking the company in an exciting new direction, thanking me for laying the groundwork, but suggesting it was time for fresh leadership. Comments from confused customers asking where I was were being deleted. When I returned to my apartment that afternoon, there was an eviction notice on the door. I'd been smart enough to put the apartment lease under the company name for tax purposes, which now meant Marlene controlled it. The notice gave me 72 hours to vacate. The home I'd barely seen while building the business was being taken away just like everything else. The cruelty was breathtaking in its completeness. The division among friends was immediate and painful. Some believed my mother's narrative that I'd been working myself to death and needed this intervention for my own good. Others saw through the lies but didn't know how to help. My college roommate offered her couch, but she had 2 kids and no space. Former employees reached out with sympathy, but were afraid to help publicly, fearing retaliation from Marlene. I'd never felt more alone in my entire life. My first panic attack happened in the parking lot of what used to be my store. I'd driven there at midnight, thinking maybe I could talk to the night shift, explain what really happened. But seeing Marlene's BMW in my parking spot, seeing lights on in my office, where she was probably destroying everything I'd built, I couldn't breathe. I sat in my car, hyperventilating chest, crushing certain I was dying. A stranger knocked on my window asking if I needed an ambulance. Rachel, my friend from culinary school, was the only person who immediately offered real help. She had a basement apartment in her house in Oak Park, nothing fancy but private and safe. I moved in with just what I could fit in my car, clothes, photos, my laptop, and ironically, the business plan I'd written 8 years ago on coffee-stained notebook paper. Everything else in my apartment furniture I'd saved for artwork from local artists I'd supported, all of it was now Marlene's to dispose of. The collapse of everything I'd built began immediately, though Marlene and my mother were too arrogant to see it coming. Within the first week, Marlene had fired Jennifer for what she called insubordination, but was actually Jennifer refusing to share our proprietary recipes with Marlene's friend, who had no food safety certification. Jennifer texted me that Marlene had screamed at her in front of customers, calling her a dinosaur who didn't understand modern business, before having security escort her out, just as they'd done to me. Carlos lasted exactly 3 more days after Jennifer was fired. When Marlene announced she was changing our signature vanilla buttercream recipe to use artificial vanilla to save money, he walked into her office, placed his keys on the desk, and walked out without saying a word. He took 3 of our best bakers with him, people who'd been with us for years, and knew that without Carlos's expertise and my vision, the quality would plummet. They all called me that night, apologizing for leaving, but unable to work for someone who understood nothing about what we'd built. The quality drop was immediate and catastrophic. Marlene hired her unemployed friends to replace our skilled bakers people who thought cooking meant microwaving frozen dinners. Within days, customers were complaining about dry cupcakes, grainy frosting, and inconsistent flavors. Our signature mood boost line became a joke when Marlene's team forgot to add the functional ingredients but kept charging premium prices. The 1-star reviews started pouring in, each one a knife in my heart, as customers wondered what had happened to their beloved bakery. The Whole Foods warning came in week 2. My contact there called me personally off the record, saying she'd never seen quality decline so rapidly. 3 stores had already sent back shipments because products arrived damaged late or not matching specifications. The mood boost bars that were supposed to contain ashwagandha and rhodiola tested negative for both ingredients. A customer had allegedly gotten food poisoning from a batch of cream-filled cupcakes that weren't stored properly. She gave Marlene 2 weeks to fix things or lose the contract entirely. The staffing chaos grew worse daily. Marlene's friends treated the bakery like their personal hangout spot, eating inventory, showing up late or not at all. One of them posted Instagram stories of herself drunk at 2 p.m. in the kitchen, wearing her work uniform, licking batter off the industrial mixer. Another was caught selling our recipes to a competitor for $500. The few original employees who remained were desperately trying to hold things together, but they were outnumbered and demoralized. The health code violation was something that would have never happened under my watch. We'd maintained perfect inspection scores for 8 years, something I was incredibly proud of. But 3 weeks into Marlene's ownership, an inspector arrived for a routine check and found catastrophic violations. Raw eggs stored above ready-to-eat items, no temperature logs for refrigeration units, expired. Ingredients still in use, employees without food, handler permits and mouse droppings in the storage area because Marlene had cancelled the pest control service to save money. Our Yelp rating, which had taken years to build to 4.8 stars, crashed to 2.3 in just 3 weeks. Regular customers wrote heartbreaking reviews about how their favourite treat spot had been destroyed. One woman wrote about ordering a birthday cake for her daughter and receiving something that looked like it had been decorated by a child with the wrong name spelled incorrectly. A man who'd proposed to his wife in our original location wrote that returning there now was like watching a loved one suffer from dementia. The vendor relationships I'd carefully cultivated over 8 years disintegrated almost overnight. Our flour supplier called me because Marlene had cursed out their delivery driver for refusing to unload without payment. The organic egg farm we'd partnered with since year 2 terminated our contract after 3 bounced checks. The local fruit farmer who supplied our seasonal ingredients showed up at my friend's house, knowing I'd understand, to tell me Marlene had accused him of overcharging and threatened to sue him for fraud. 2 of our 3 franchise locations threatened immediate legal action. The franchise agreements included strict quality standards and operational requirements that Marlene was violating daily. The owner in Milwaukee drove down personally after customers complained his location was selling substandard products. He found Marlene had changed suppliers without notification, violating the contract terms. The Minneapolis location simply closed temporarily rather than sell the garbage Marlene was producing, sending me a message that they'd rather lose money than destroy their reputation. The desperate calls from my mother started in week 3. First, she left voicemails saying they were experiencing small hiccups and wondering if I might have any advice about supplier relationships. Then the calls became more frequent, more panicked. She claimed equipment was breaking, which I knew meant they weren't maintaining it properly. She asked about password resets for systems she didn't even know existed. One voicemail at 3 a.m. was just her crying, saying this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Marlene's spending while the business hemorrhaged money was obscene. She leased a $90,000 Mercedes SUV as a company vehicle. She hired an interior designer to renovate the office I'd furnished from thrift stores, spending $40,000 on custom furniture while not paying vendors. She gave herself a salary of $200,000 a year, nearly triple what I'd ever paid myself. She ordered $10,000 in branded merchandise with her name on it, coffee mugs and t-shirts that would never sell because customers were fleeing in droves. A former employee forwarded me the all-staff email Marlene sent at the end of week 3. It was unhinged, filled with legal threats against anyone who criticized the new management accusations, that staff were sabotaging her success, and demands for loyalty oaths. She announced that anyone caught communicating with me would be immediately terminated and sued for corporate espionage. The email ended with a bizarre rant about how she was being persecuted for trying to modernize an outdated business model. The competition began circling like vultures smelling death. The owner of a rival bakery chain called me directly saying he'd heard about the situation and wanted to offer his support, which meant he wanted insider information about acquiring our locations cheap. Another competitor posted on social media about exciting opportunities coming soon for fans of artisan bakeries who'd been disappointed lately, obviously referring to us. The wholesale clients we'd taken years to acquire were being aggressively courted by everyone who'd wanted our market share. By month 2, the crisis had reached catastrophic proportions. The Whole Foods contract, which represented 70% of our revenue, was officially terminated. The email came on a Tuesday morning, copied to me by my contact, who wanted me to know she'd fought for us, but couldn't justify keeping a vendor who'd failed to deliver 3 consecutive orders on time or to specification. Without that contract, the business model collapsed entirely. The math simply didn't work anymore. The meeting request came that same evening. My mother showed up at Rachel's house uninvited, somehow having found the address. She looked older, defeated, her usually perfect hair unwashed and her designer clothes wrinkled. Marlene waited in the car, too cowardly or ashamed to face me directly. My mother stood on the doorstep like a stranger, holding a folder of financial documents that showed the business was losing $40,000 per week. Their proposition was insulting in its audacity. They wanted me to come back as a consultant to fix everything, while Marlene retained the CEO title and majority ownership. My mother had prepared a contract offering me $20 an hour, no benefits, no equity, just hourly wages to save the empire I'd built. She actually said they were being generous, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to help family. The delusion was staggering. My refusal was calm but absolute. I explained that they hadn't just stolen my business, they'd destroyed it. You can't consultant for ruins, you can't advise ashes. Everything that made Sweet Henrietta's special, the culture, the quality, the relationships, the trust, they'd burned it all down in 8 weeks. There was no consulting that could resurrect what they'd killed. I told her to leave and never come back to this house. The financial reality finally penetrated their denial. Without the Whole Foods contract, and with daily sales down 80%, the business was hemorrhaging money at an unsustainable rate. The $40,000 per week loss was actually conservative. It didn't account for the lawsuits beginning to pile up from unpaid vendors, wrongful termination claims from fired employees, and breach of contract suits from franchises. Personal bankruptcy wasn't just possible, it was weeks away. That's when Marlene finally broke. She got out of the car, mascara running down her face, and admitted everything. She never wanted the business. She knew nothing about running it. Our mother had planned everything, convinced her it would be easy money, that the business practically ran itself. She'd been having panic attacks daily, couldn't sleep, and had started drinking heavily to cope with the pressure. She looked at me and said the words I'd waited to hear. This was all Mum's idea. The truth that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. My mother had been in talks with our largest competitor for months before the takeover, negotiating to sell the business once she had control. She needed Marlene as the front person because the power of attorney only allowed her to transfer assets, not sell them. The plan was to transfer to Marlene, wait a few months to avoid legal challenges, then sell to the competitor for $5 million. They'd already received an initial offer of $2 million for the distressed assets. The competitor's current offer had dropped to $800,000, barely enough to cover the debts Marlene had accumulated in 2 months. The bakery chain that had been worth $5.2 million when they stole it was now worth less than the building lease obligations. They destroyed over 8 years of value creation in 8 weeks of incompetence and greed. The efficiency of the destruction was almost impressive. My counteroffer was simple and non-negotiable. I would return, but only with complete ownership. Transferred back to me immediately. Not majority control, not partnership, but 100% ownership. They would sign a document admitting to the deceptive transfer and waive any claims to the business or its assets. Both would be permanently banned from any involvement in any business I owned. They would pay all my legal fees, and they would issue a public statement admitting what they'd done. The conditions were designed to be both protective and punitive. The ban on involvement was obvious. I'd never let them near anything I built again. The legal fees payment was practical. They'd cost me nearly $30,000 already. But the public statement was about justice. They'd humiliated me publicly, destroyed my reputation with lies. The truth needed to be equally public. I wanted every customer, vendor, and employee to know exactly what had happened. The negotiation broke down over the public apology. My mother refused, still desperately trying to save face in a community where everyone already knew what she'd done. She proposed private letters to key stakeholders or a vague statement about family transitions. She actually suggested we could say it was all a misunderstanding, that I'd agreed to the transfer but changed my mind. The delusion that she could maintain her reputation after destroying her daughter's life was breathtaking. The leverage I held was their pending financial destruction. Both had signed personal guarantees when Marlene took over, making them personally liable for business debts. The building lease alone had 3 years remaining at $15,000 per month. Equipment leases, vendor contracts, franchise obligations, they were personally on the hook for over $2 million in liabilities. Without my knowledge and relationships to rebuild the business, they faced total financial ruin. The final ultimatum was delivered through my lawyer. They had 48 hours to accept all terms, or I would walk away forever. No negotiation, no compromise, no family discount on my conditions. I would let them drown in the disaster they'd created while I started over somewhere else. I had Carlos and Jennifer ready to join me in a new venture. We'd already found a potential location in Milwaukee far from their toxic influence. The clock started ticking. The surrender came at hour 47. My lawyer received the signed documents returning full ownership to me, along with the written statement admitting to the deceptive transfer. The public statement was posted on the company's social media accounts, my mother's Facebook page, and sent to our entire email list. It was brief but clear. They had wrongfully taken the business. Using deceptive means, I was the rightful owner, and they apologized for the damage caused. Walking back into the destroyed business felt like entering a crime scene. Half the equipment was broken from misuse. The recipe books were missing pages, either stolen or destroyed. The customer database had been corrupted by Marlene's attempts to export it. The place smelled wrong, like failure and neglect instead of vanilla and success. But it was mine again, and that was all that mattered. I could rebuild from ashes because I'd built from nothing before. Jennifer and Carlos returned the next day, bringing 4 of the original team with them. We spent the first week just cleaning and assessing damage. The financial situation was worse than the documents had shown. Marlene had taken out a high-interest loan against future receivables, adding another $100,000 in debt. Several key suppliers refused to work with us again, regardless of ownership. The health department required a complete re-inspection before we could fully reopen. The customer apology tour was exhausting but necessary. I personally called every wholesale client we'd lost, explaining the situation and asking for a second chance. Most were sympathetic but cautious, offering small trial orders, rather than returning to previous levels. The Whole Foods buyer agreed to a meeting, but made it clear that rebuilding trust would take time. I flew to their headquarters in Austin, presented a comprehensive recovery plan, and earned a probationary contract for 5 stores, with potential to expand if we met strict quality metrics for 6 months. 6 months into the recovery, we'd reached 70% of our previous revenue. It was slower growth than I wanted, but steady and sustainable. We'd rehired most of our original team and added new talent, who brought fresh ideas. The Mood Boost line was reformulated with even better ingredients and stricter quality controls. Customer reviews slowly climbed back above 4 stars. We were wounded but healing. The family aftermath was predictable but still painful. I haven't spoken to my mother in over a year. She sends cards on holidays that I return unopened. Marlene reached out once asking to meet for coffee to apologize properly. I agreed, but only to get closure. She admitted she'd always resented my success and that our mother had fed that resentment for years. She was in therapy working through her issues, but I made it clear that while I wished her well, she was no longer my sister in any meaningful way. The therapy journey was essential for my own healing. My therapist specialized in family trauma and helped me understand the dynamics I'd been trapped in. My mother was a narcissist who couldn't tolerate one daughter outshining the other. Marlene was the golden child who'd been crippled by that status, never learning resilience or self-reliance. I was the scapegoat, whose success threatened the family mythology. Understanding these patterns didn't eliminate the pain, but gave it context. New boundaries weren't just about legal protections, but emotional ones too. I hired a chief operating officer, promoting Jennifer to the role she'd always deserved. This freed me from 18-hour days and allowed me to have an actual life. I set up ironclad succession planning that excluded any family involvement. Multiple lawyers reviewed every document. The business structure now included poison pills that would destroy the company's value if anyone tried to forcibly take control again. Personal growth came slowly but genuinely. I started dating David, who owned a small tech startup and understood the demands of entrepreneurship. He'd actually followed our story in the business press and reached out initially to offer support. Entrepreneur to entrepreneur. Our first date lasted 6 hours talking about everything except business. He proposed a year later in my original bakery location, saying he wanted to add joy to a place that had seen too much pain. The wedding decision was the hardest but most necessary boundary. David and I married in a small ceremony with 40 guests, my chosen family of employees, who'd stood by me, friends who'd supported me, and his wonderful parents who'd welcomed me immediately. My mother wasn't invited. She found out through social media, and I'm told she was devastated. But you don't get to destroy someone and then expect to celebrate their happiness. The foundation I started for women entrepreneurs facing family business conflicts has helped dozens of women in similar situations. We provide legal resources, emotional support, and practical guidance for protecting their businesses from toxic family dynamics. Every quarter, I speak at events sharing my story, and every time multiple women approach me afterward with tears in their eyes, saying they thought they were alone in dealing with family who resented their success. Today, the business is worth $7 million, but the number matters less than what it represents. It's truly mine, built on foundations of trust and integrity rather than family mythology and toxic obligation. We've expanded to 6 locations and launched a nationwide shipping program. Carlos is now head of operations with an equity stake he earned through loyalty when it mattered most. Jennifer runs 3 locations and is saving to buy her own franchise. The profound lesson from this journey isn't about business strategy or legal protections, though both matter immensely. It's that success means nothing if you don't protect it from those who would destroy it out of envy. Family isn't always your safe space. Sometimes they're the ones holding the knife waiting for you to turn your back. But when you survive their worst betrayal, you discover strength you never knew existed. The business I rebuilt isn't just stronger. I am too. I learnt that chosen family, the people who support your dreams rather than resent them, are worth more than blood relations who see your success as their failure. The deepest truth I've learned is that sometimes the greatest gift toxic people can give you is showing their true nature so completely that you can finally walk away without guilt. My mother and sister freed me from decades of obligation and manipulation by overplaying their hand. They thought they were stealing my business, but they actually gave me my life back. Now I wake up every morning knowing that everything I have, I've earned and protected. Nobody can take it from me again because I've learnt to recognize the wolves, especially when they wear familiar faces. Would you do the same in my situation? Have you ever had family try to destroy what you built out of jealousy? Please share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over betrayal. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family members who can't celebrate their success. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the best revenge against those who tried to destroy you is building something even better from the ruins they created.